Welcome to Punch Up Goes to the Movies. This is the new YouTube show here from the Punch Up Entertainment Network where we talk about movies currently in theaters or on streaming. I'm John Campbell.
And I am Mike Gargoni.
And this is going to be a recurring show. No specific schedule. Basically, whenever it feels like there's a movie we're interested enough to talk about and there isn't scheduling room over on any of our other shows.
Look, we needed some wiggle room for the whole, may the panel be with you and panel up scheduling, because it turns out that Picard Season 3 and Guardians of the Galaxy released within a week of each other.
That was basically, this was something we've kind of been talking about doing, but this is why it's happening now, is because we're like, wait, how do we not talk about Guardians of the Galaxy? But, so we're going to be doing this, and basically as movies come up that are interesting, whether they be new releases in theaters or on streaming, some panel made up of people from the Punch Up Entertainment Network will talk about it. And sometimes it may just be me or you or whoever talking for 10 minutes on their own or something about a movie if they are so inspired. So basically this is a film criticism show where we don't have to do it. So if we're doing this, it's because we actually want to talk about a movie.
Like all film criticism, it's completely optional.
It's completely optional, but unlike other things, we're not setting a schedule on it, so it's not like, oh, we have to review something this week and there's nothing to talk about. There will always be something to talk about. Now, that doesn't always mean the movies will be good. Hopefully, they will be, always, but at the very least, this will focus on movies we think need to be spoken of.
Right, and obviously as we go into the summer release schedule where, movies are dropping left and right, though obviously, the whole, all movies, especially blockbusters, are released in the summer has become less and less of a thing over the last few years.
I still think that's, all blockbusters come out in the summer. I still think the summer is full of blockbusters, but
sure.
Yes, we are certainly seeing a world where things like John Wick came out in March, and actually there's a lot of, strategy to doing that. Sort of putting out a big movie in the spring can give you open runway in a lot of ways. Now we are, sure. And I think that's also a way of saying there's probably going to be a lot of these episodes on YouTube for the next couple months, and then less in other parts of the year. But yeah, so we're kicking things off, as one would expect, with a Marvel movie. Those pesky Marvel movies.
Yeah, John, I don't know about you, but I am feeling it in terms of superhero fatigue. I just don't think there's any stories left to tell.
Oh my God, the superhero fatigue comment. The superhero fatigue comment is always hilarious. It's like any kind of trend in Hollywood, right? When they talk about it, it's like one superhero movie come out and not do well, and they go, superhero fatigue, right? And Shazam 2 bombed. But I haven't seen it, but from what I gather, it's not very good. That's always the thing about no, man, this kind of movie doesn't work. It's like, yeah, but that example of that genre was terrible, or something like that.
Whereas you compare this with this movie, I went to go see it last night, and I had trouble finding tickets.
Sure. I mean, this movie is already doing much better. The weekend projections for this, we're recording this on opening weekend of this movie, and the weekend projections have already been adjusted up. It's made more than they were expecting.
Shocker.
I know. It is one of those things where... And the other thing that I think we often talk about, and we'll get into the movie itself, but it is sort of, we are ever studying the film industry, because I think it fascinates both of us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The idea, the perception of how people talk about these movies is so interesting, and what the idea of a successful movie is interesting, because I've seen people try to couch this movie as a disappointment because it didn't make as much opening weekend as the last Guardians of the Galaxy movie. But if you think about it, that was 5 years ago, and that feels like that was a whole different world and landscape of the business.
Completely different film business ecosystem.
Yeah.
Everything post-pandemic has to be taken on a brand new curve, I feel like.
Well, I just was reading an interesting article that was talking about, because when we talked about Ant-Man, and people, I've seen so many people going yeah, that's the first true bomb for Marvel. And then I just was reading an article yesterday that talked about theater owners specifically cite Ant-Man's release as major boon to revenue in last quarter. So now, wait a minute. Hold on. Because once again, they're judging these numbers based on basically a totally different landscape for this business. So
yeah.
Ant-Man was like, man, in a dearth of time when we weren't making money, Ant-Man came in and saved us. And now they're like, and here comes Guardians to make us even more. So I'm not seeing this superhero fatigue. If you make bad superhero movies, people won't go. But if you make good superhero movies, people would go, because it seems like people like to see good things.
It turns out, John, and I know this is going to come as a shock to you, and it certainly shocked me, is that, like, any genre can make good movies if you make a good movie.
This is always my thing about, like, there is no genre I will automatically love or hate. It is still about the quality of the individual work. And I will say the big thing that is working in this movie's favor is the buzz is huge for this movie. There's so much positivity leading up to this movie from critics and things like that. And then the big thing is this has, we always talk about how do you judge whether or not people are enjoying a movie. And Cinema Score is as much of a barometer as we have, which is just the people who take the... When I saw this, the literally the first showing they had here in Oregon, because I'm, insane. And I'm like, I gotta be the first to see it.
I don't disagree with your statement, John.
No pushback. But there were the guys handing out the tablets to fill out I'm like, please, I just want to leave. I just want to get in my car.
You're part of the problem, John.
I guess I'm part of the problem. But anyway, it has a solid A Cinema Score, which not a ton of movies get. Like, that means like across the board, everybody's pretty much enjoying it.
I mean, that's the thing, right? This movie is the culmination of a trilogy, but it is also like the last little hurrah of like the original characters introduced in like the first little stretch of Marvel movies, right? Because obviously Guardians 1 is a phase 2 movie, but like in terms of like the characters that were introduced and that we went into Infinity War and Endgame with as like, these are our major plot thread characters that we're following. The Guardians, I think, are the last ones to get like their triumphant third movie.
Sure. Absolutely. And they've made a big deal about this being the end of this trilogy, more so than I think, probably not other than Endgame, if we've really seen like a movie presented as a capstone in some way.
Right. And like Endgame in a lot of ways, I think it is not unique because I'm comparing it directly to another trilogy of movies, but like the fact that a single filmmaker has helmed these three movies and been the caretaker of these characters, even across other films within the fantabulous mystery that is the MCU.
That is the most unique thing about the Guardians, right? Is that even when the Guardians showed up in Avengers movies, they had to run all dialogue and everything by James Gunn. He was the keeper of these characters. And I think, as we've also talked about, in terms of sort of like, people talk about Marvel as this big conglomerate, which it is, but this idea of like within that, James Gunn kind of stands out as the auteur, right? Within this pocket of the universe, these characters are really his, because while these are based on comic books, he really defined these characters in a way that now the comic books reflect, right? Like this version of the Guardians of the Galaxy, a lot of it is just from James Gunn, even if it's jumping off of at least the foundations built in the comics.
Right, yeah. And like there's a lot of set dressing that Gunn used that is straight from the comics. Obviously the character names and some of the aesthetics that he uses. But like in terms of the characterization, he totally flipped the script with that first Guardians movie. And we talked about how that movie is lightning in a bottle. And it is like such a magical thing that came out of nowhere that even us comic book fans were not expecting anyone to click with. And the fact that everybody clicked with it was a shock.
It is as close to an original work within the, like a almost truly original work within the MCU, right? Like it really isn't adapting anything. It is taking broad ideas of characters in the world, but really filtered through James Gunn, who I think rightfully so has been really praised by critics and fans alike as being one of the most unique voices in the superhero genre.
Right.
If you want to call it a genre, which is always sort of an interesting debate.
The comparison I was trying to draw between James Gunn is the only other filmmakers I can even like compare him to within the MCU specifically are the Russo brothers, right?
Yeah. Russo brothers and I think Taika.
At this point, Taika's getting there. Yeah, he's got 2 films, and he's like very much made Thor like different tonally, and like landed on his own vibe for that character in the segment of the world.
But both the Russos and Taika inherited those characters from other filmmakers and sort of reworked them, and I think made them even more popular and came to redefine them. But James Gunn, it's almost like, I mean, these really are, the way he talks about them and things like that, these are his children, you know. He is their creator.
It's also telling that Taika's time in the MCU came after James Gunn, right? Because I think so much of the post Guardians of the Galaxy 1 MCU is in part a reaction to Guardians of the Galaxy. If it's like growing closer to it in tone or pushing away from it in tone, either way it's a reaction.
There definitely is. I think the first Guardians was sort of like oh, you can do that? You know, I mean, it was sort of like, if people can come in and really, you know, because I always push back on the criticism that every Marvel movie feels the same. I hate that criticism. I think it's a lazy one from people who don't really want to vibe with these movies. Mm-hmm. But Gunn in particular, that first Guardians was like, wow, you can really feel a filmmaker at work here. And I think since then, I'm not going to say every single movie, but more and more we feel that in these Marvel movies. They are more willing to give an authorial like stamp to the movies.
If you look at the Phase 1 movies, because was Guardians the first MCU movie to be released post Avengers?
No,
that was Iron Man 3.
Yeah. But it's pretty close.
And Iron Man 3 is a Shane Black movie. Talk about auteur filmmakers.
100%, yeah. I mean, I do think, and then something I gathered that they're more interested in, from what I've heard about what their sort of thinking is now, is getting people with more. Feige apparently really loved having Sam Raimi do Multiverse of Madness, and he's going, oh, it's interesting to see people bring their own voices, especially because now the MCU is so established. It's like, let's see what the Sam Raimi flavor does to the MCU stew, you know?
Sure. But what I was getting at was, like, you look at everything post-Guardians in Phase 2 and especially into Phase 3 leading up to Infinity War and Endgame, like, barring the Russo brothers who were doing their own thing with Captain America, like, a lot of the movies, you talk about people complaining about the samey feel to the Marvel movies. And again, I agree. I think that's a lazy criticism.
Yeah.
But it is a reaction to how everyone reacted so strongly to the Guardians films, I feel like.
Yeah.
Because it is this level of, and for better or for worse, snark, and a combination of snark and pathos that James Gunn does like perfectly in most of his films.
Absolutely, that is the thing that is so unique, and this movie in particular, and we're still we're still talking broadly about the movie. We'll dig in deeper, and we'll make sure we warn people about spoilers and things like that.
Yeah.
When we get there, but this movie and all of Gunn's movies, I really am such a huge fan of his because it's a really hard line to walk, and we see so many people not get that ratio right.
Yeah, no, exactly, and I think you could even argue that Taika goes more one way than the other, right? He has plenty of heart, but he definitely leans more on his snark is a little less mean-spirited is the wrong way to do it, but like Gunn has like a harsher snark, whereas Taika's a little bit more whimsical.
I was gonna say Taika isn't even. I mean, there is a snark to it, but it's goofier.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, like, some people might not click with that in the same way, and that's fine.
I think we know some of those people.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And like, look, that comes down to personal taste, and that's totally fair.
It totally does. Yeah, it totally does. The thing is that I think I've liked so much about this is, for better or worse, those are Taika films. You can feel Taika in them. And same thing with I know a fairly polarizing movie in the MCU is Eternals, which I love, and for better or worse, that is clearly a Chloe Zhao movie.
I was just having this conversation the other night in terms of, like, okay, there's clear, like, trilogies and, like, sets of movies in the MCU, but there are also, like, there are way less of them, but there are very unique, singular one-offs in the MCU. And Eternals right now, like, say what you will about the movie and what you thought about it, but it is not an anonymous film by any stretch of the imagination.
That you do not watch that movie and go, man, Disney really got in here and mucked around. In the way I think you do, the biggest one that I feel that in is Thor: The Dark World, which I always stand by. That's my least favorite Marvel movie, and that's still like a B-. You know, like it's still a movie I've watched 10 times. Because I just love these movies. But that one, the problems therein are that movie had no ethereal voice. And when you hear the director of that movie go, yeah, I never knew what was going on day to day on that movie. And, and I'm like, dude, I get it. I can see that in your movie. There was no clear vision on that film.
Right. And I think, like, you can look at Age of Ultron as one that, like, clearly has some fingerprints of...
Yes, Age of Ultron, it's not as detrimental, but there definitely is stuff in there where you're like, I don't think this is Whedon stuff.
I mean, the whole Thor is famously reported on as just like, that whole thing was forced in there by the studio.
And I think it's also something where Marvel has gotten better. I mean, the other thing is people are so harsh on Marvel, but you're going like, they are still in pretty unprecedented territory for what they're doing. And, as we always say, they're still doing this better than anyone else. So there are missteps, but things like Dark World, things like Age of Ultron, the thing that I love about Kevin Feige and the people at Marvel is they take those lessons and it feels like, oh, we're learning how to do that sort of thing better.
And even the most egregious examples of studio meddling or making filmmakers more anonymous in the MCU project, like, are leaps and bounds above the sledgehammer surgery we see in, like, Spider-Man 3, speaking of Raimi.
Right, absolutely. And that's the thing about it, because it does still feel like studio meddling is still in the is towards Marvel. You know what I mean? Like, it's still Marvel feels like its own entity. So, like, that the studio meddling we're talking about is, they're trying to set up other Marvel movies, not we're trying to, like, goose this or do that sort of thing that studios think about. Like, there's not like, well, this was put in here for the teen kids or something like that. It's like, oh, you guys lean too hard in trying to lay a thread for Thor, but I understand that impulse at least because you're trying to thread a universe. It's just, especially, really up through until probably Phase 3, there was a lot of push and pull about how you lay those threads.
Right, exactly.
And now it's interesting because I see so much criticism of they're not laying enough threads.
And that's what I came away from Guardians 3 with, and we're getting a little mildly into spoiler territory at this point, so, like, if you want to avoid spoilers completely for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, stop listening, go see the movie. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, we'll put our spoiler warning right here, now. Here it is. There's see that hand, that's our spoiler warning. All right.
But
from now on, there will be spoilers about. All right, go ahead.
One thing I was really impressed with this movie, and one thing that I think makes it stand out amongst the, like, trilogy capstones, quote unquote, is that it doesn't lay any further groundwork, which I found great.
Not anything expressly, right? Like, there's sort of things where but it's loose things where you're like, oh, I could imagine a movie that takes this new Guardians team at the end of it.
When they said the name Phyla at the end with Rocket's new team, I was like, oh, Phyla Vell, I know that person. Quasar, awesome.
Sure, of course, yeah. I saw this, of course, with fellow comic book nerd Brendan Jones. Just turned to me and he goes, and just literally that scene, and he just turned to me and went, Quasar? It's like, yeah. That's sort of the thing. But yes, I think that's it exactly. Or I totally see them making a movie called The Legendary Star-Lord, right? I mean, that's...
Sure, yeah.
And that's great. And
he dates Kitty Pryde and they have a messy breakup.
Yeah, I mean, because there are lots of great Star-Lord solo comics. But yeah, it does feel like this does feel much like Endgame in that way, where it's like, this is a cap to this. There are definitely threads that could be picked up by other filmmakers, but it doesn't specifically put anything on a track going, there's the next movie. Like Guardians 2 did, which is great, with the Adam Warlock thing at the end.
Yeah.
And that Adam Warlock's in this movie, so,
Yeah, it turns out he followed up on it. Because that, getting into this film a little bit, and speaking a bit more retroactively, is that despite the fact, when we're talking about studio meddling, despite the fact that the Guardians films were always, like, threading their way towards the Infinity War Endgame thing like everybody else. It felt so removed because it was still James Gunn's thing.
Yeah, you get the sense of it's everything that was set up. Well, because the thing about it too is they were so much more. They were already in the Infinity War. The Avengers come into it, right? But the having Gamora and Nebula and Drax and characters that are so directly related to Thanos is like, if anything, it was about a Guardians movie that was careening towards an Avengers movie. So the Guardians most naturally slipped into that, right? I think it makes sense. So it's sort of like what James Gunn was already doing in his movies. It's almost like the Marvel Universe bent towards James Gunn rather than the other way.
And that's kind of what I've been saying for the last like 10 or so minutes, is that like I feel like James Gunn so radically shifted what the tone of these movies could be with the first Guardians movie, that everything kind of like started to lean Gunnward in terms of the MCU. And I'll be curious to see.
And we'll talk about the DC universe is just straight up going Gunn.
I mean, look, am I more excited than is reasonable to the fact that James Gunn is writing and directing a Superman movie? Yes.
I cannot wait. I'm so bummed that we're in a writer's strike that will certainly delay it. Because he's only written, he's like, Warner Brothers goes, well, James Gunn did turn in the first draft before the strike. You're like, yeah, but you're not going to shoot the first draft, so who knows how long this is going to be. But yeah, dude, I cannot wait to see his Superman movie. I mean, I mean, I'll say that he is the most exciting voice in superhero films. Period. I think he is the most. You know, you can get into best and what that means, but I think he is the most interesting maker of superhero films.
I don't disagree with that statement, just because, again, he is this auteur filmmaker that when it is his vision and voice behind a thing, you can tell.
And because his Suicide Squad movie is bar none the best thing DC has put out.
I would agree with that. I know there are some people that disagree with that fact, but...
Well, those people are wrong. No, but I mean, I do think at least it is the most striking. Once again, you can get into personal taste, but it's like that thing does stand alone in some capacity within the DCU. Whether or not you enjoy it is of course up to each person. But it's like you once again can't deny. Well, that's a breath of fresh air in some way.
Right. Well, it's not 5 hours long and in black and white in chunks, so you know.
I mean, I think that was part of it. But you just think like, man, how well that movie. That movie managed to avoid so many of the pitfalls that other DC movies have fallen into. And clearly Warner Brothers took notice because they went, do you want to run this whole thing? Kind
of? Especially after he ran a show, I'm sure that was like a pretty good like landing, like runway for him to take over the whole thing.
Peacemaker's one of the best pieces of superhero television I've ever seen. Like, it's just, he's so, his passion is there. But the thing I like about him is he is never a slave to the IP.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's, I mean, we've talked for years about how, like, the best adaptations aren't the ones that try to do a frame-by-frame recreation of a thing. Say what you will about 300, but that's the ones that take inspiration from all over the source material.
He's almost the opposite of a Zack Snyder, and I like Zack Snyder too. He's very polarizing. I feel like I don't have a polarized opinion in that I just mostly enjoy his movies, but it's not a lifestyle. And I know there are people who just worship that guy, and it's like, no, I think it's pretty good, and I'm excited to see his big space movie on Netflix. But that is a guy who is very, very devoted to the page of a comic book, right? The splash panels, the specific framing therein. Once again, your mileage may vary on how much you enjoy that, but that Watchmen movie is slavish to that comic.
Yeah, mostly.
Yeah, for the most part, but including literally, he's just recreating panels. He's doing dialogue verbatim from the word bubbles. Whereas Gunn is, like we're saying, he's a guy I think he did talk about when he made the first Guardians, he goes, I think I'm the only person working here who has an active subscription to these comics. Like, he is... Because, the Russo brothers, I love those guys, but a lot of it is like, we're capturing what we remember when we were kids and loved comics. Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of it. Taika's like that, too. There's a lot of guys who go, this is reconnecting me with something I had loved years ago, but have somewhat left behind.
Raimi's the same way, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Raimi's still talking about the Lee Ditko Spider-Man, right? Like,
right.
Whereas Gunn is going, oh, I just read the Jason Aaron Thor or whatever, that kind of, and he's like actively keeping up with all this stuff. But yes, being filtered through James Gunn, and I think once again a lot of those guys are like that too. They're good at filtering it through. Chris Nolan is a guy, and then you have guys like Chris Nolan who go, I never liked comic books, and you're like, well, I did see your movies, so that makes sense. You managed to make the least comic booky Batman movie. Good on you, buddy.
You did remake Heat with Batman and the Joker, so.
And I do love Heat, and I do love Batman. When he made Tale of Two Cities with Batman and Bane is a little bit where he kind of lost me. But once again, your mileage may vary. But I do think that's the thing about it is like James Gunn is this guy who's just fed decades of comic books into his brain, and now we're seeing them filter out through his own creativity, and it's just so exciting, and it does lead to this feeling I have. People seem to have about this movie where it just feels so alive because you can feel the passion with which he's making this movie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's something to be said for... I really dislike it when fans, like, claim ownership over a filmmaker, but there's something about James Gunn, especially for you and I know that like we've been with this guy since fucking Scooby-Doo and Dawn of the Dead, as like we knew this guy's name and we followed his films, and Slither was in constant rotation among our friend group.
I've seen that movie 15 to 20 times because and by the way, if you haven't seen it and you in any way like these movies, go watch Slither. You'll love that movie. It is so James Gunn. I mean, we went to we trucked it. We were suburban kids who trucked it downtown to go to the Art House Theater to see Super.
Yeah.
Which was just, I love Super. It is so not a Marvel movie, but it is also not entirely dissimilar from these movies. It is still very much James Gunn.
I played the Suda51 video game Lollipop Chainsaw because James Gunn wrote it.
Well, he said an interesting thing when Guardians 2 came out, and it's something that has stuck with me about every once in a while somebody will crystallize something about just film in general. And he talked about being a kid, and there's just certain forms of art, and I love this phrase, and he goes, that beat at the rhythm of my heart. And he goes, that's what I want to make. And he goes, many people like it, but some people, it will just be their rhythm. And that is how I feel about James Gunn, where I'm just like, there's a wavelength here. Like, we are connected in some way. I feel this guy is speaking our language. Yeah. But the cool thing to see is he's doing that with $200 million tentpole movies. Because when he's doing it with Super, but when he's doing it with Super, that movie cost absolutely nothing, and you're going like, wow, there are tons of filmmakers like that where I'm like, here's a guy with no money who's just on his own passion doing that. It is rare that Hollywood will just totally. I mean, Taika's kind of a guy like that too, where What We Do in the Shadows is one of those movies for me, and I think for both of us, right? Where it was like we saw that and was just like, holy God, here's a guy who's like in our wavelength. And so the fact that they're being
that was definitely like, we like Flight of the Conchords. What if a lot of the people who made Flight of the Conchords went and made a vampire movie? Oh boy.
It's just so crazy to me that particularly Taika, I'm like, it's like here he is, he's getting his great outfit at the Met Gala, and you're like, Taika's like a celebrity? That's so weird. He's still like a weird comedy filmmaker to me. And I can't wait to see his new soccer movie, which looks great.
Yeah.
Next Goal Wins looks hilarious. But it's so interesting that these guys who... I think it shows where the industry is 20 plus years ago, these guys would be cult filmmakers.
Yeah.
And they'd be making little movies that people love, but would be mostly like rental hits.
If you had asked me 10 years ago, just prior to the first Guardians coming out, that's what I would have called James Gunn, as a cult filmmaker.
Sure. Absolutely. And that was sort of the, and I will say what you will about Joss Whedon. We all have opinions about him. He definitely, but he was the guy who went, you should call my friend James Gunn. He really likes comic books, to Kevin Feige. So, I in some ways, I feel like James Gunn has kind of picked up what I used to get from Whedon. Yeah.
Well, and it helps that when James Gunn got canceled and people got on his ass about a stupid joke he made in his 20s, that was one thing, but the uncovering of all of Whedon's mistreatment of women over the years is definitely.
Well, the other thing is, how many people came to James Gunn's defense? Nobody seems to want to be like, Joss Whedon's okay, you guys.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's always the thing I look to is like, well, what do their friends say about them? If people's friends are going, hey, that's inconsistent with the guy I know, then I look at the accusations or criticisms a little bit more side-eyed. But when there's just radio silence about someone's toxic behavior, like, yeah, it probably adds up. Doesn't seem like everybody's just kind of like, okay, I had it coming.
Jonathan Majors.
Well, that's sort of the thing. The massive silence from literally everyone about that guy is like, oh, that means it's at least not inconsistent with what they've witnessed.
Right, exactly.
And that's the thing about that James Gunn thing. Having seen this now, it is terrifying to imagine the world where he didn't direct this movie.
And that's what I was going to say was this movie is such a vindication of James Gunn because he was able to come back and do it and finish off this series of films that he started. It feels so unique and special because of that in a way. And like obviously you can tell every actor in this movie feels the same way.
Well, I mean, that was pretty much what I think was sort of the final nail in them not getting somebody else was basically the entire cast is like, we don't want to do this without him.
Yeah, absolutely.
When everybody stood by. And I also love something Gunn said when that was happening, and I think this movie further proves that. He goes like, yeah, I said a bunch of shitty stuff as a young person because I was a shitty young person. He goes, and the Guardians movies are about shitty people becoming better.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything, he goes, in my work, you're literally seeing me wrestle with what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, and that's why James Gunn is such a big difference to me in terms of like people who've had shitty things come up about their past and like things getting revealed about what they've said or done in the past. Is James Gunn is a guy who got out in front of the shitty things he said as a 20-something, being like, yeah, I was a shitty 20-something. I can apologize for the stupid like pedophilia jokes I made and move on and try to be a better person.
It's also one of those things where I always go back to like he made stupid pedophilia jokes not aimed at it. It's all just like it's I read that and went, I mean, boy, I'm glad that not a lot of the stuff we wrote in high school is, available on the internet forever necessarily.
Right.
Because it is sort of like, yeah, I remember just being that edgy young guy who's like, I'm going to make a rape joke or I'm going to make a pedophilia joke and whatever, old man, if you can't take it, And it's just like, and now I look back and go like, oh, God, I wouldn't. Every once in a while I'll find some script or even think about something we wrote back in the day and I'm like, God, I can't even imagine trying to argue for that now.
No, exactly. And
it is what it is, yeah. But I'm saying, like, it's one of those things where I do think when people talk, is cancel culture going too far? I think James Gunn's a prime example of maybe at one point it was a slash and burn, but the fact that people kind of went, actually, wait a minute, speaks to some level of, thought process and nuance within culture.
Right. Yeah. At least when it is deserved, I feel like there is a lot of like rotten underbelly that is getting revealed in the last like decade or so, and that's a good thing. But the people who are genuinely trying to be good people and are trying to overcome maybe shitty parts of their past will maintain themselves.
But yeah, it is like a snarky comedy nerd 20 years ago being a dick online is not the same as punching women, or whatever. Like that's the thing. I do think that nuance is becoming clearer and clearer. When at one time it was all like, nope, if you're bad, you're bad.
Yeah, no.
So
and all of that is to say, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is good.
It's extremely good. I really, really love this movie. As the Guardians movies I rank so high in the MCU. They really some of my favorites because they are so singular and unique and do vibe with my feelings and they just know how to pull the heartstrings in a big way for me.
I was having this conversation on Discord the other day. I'd be curious to get your opinion on it. Is that having now seen this movie and have you only seen it the once?
I've only seen it the once. I'm planning to go again this week, but I've only seen it one time.
So obviously we don't have a ton of objectivity just yet because this movie has just released and we've only seen it the once. But like in terms of MCU trilogies, is Guardians of the Galaxy the best among them?
I think it is. I mean, I think it has a lot working towards it, where it sort of feels inevitably it has to be, like the fact that it's such a singular vision of a filmmaker, right? Like, but it doesn't. I mean, I think the other one that probably the only one that's even possibly in the debate is Captain America.
I would argue Spider-Man as well, but that's just
me. Yes, actually, that's true, and that's another one that also is a singular director, right? John Watts directed all three of those.
Yeah.
So I do think that as well. Yeah. I think that probably is actually the best one, because to bring up with, because the thing with the Captain America movies, I love all three Captain America movies, but there is it's a Joe Johnston movie that then hands off to two Russo brothers movies.
Right.
And it is designed to feel that way, and it makes sense story-wise. Iron Man is purposefully it's not purposely all over the place, but just is all over the place, and you can really feel the discord between the filmmakers working there. I like all those movies, once again, but it really feels like Shane Black didn't, beyond like story beats, doesn't really care to continue what Jon Favreau's doing. He's making a Shane Black movie.
I mean, I would argue that Jon Favreau might not even be concerned with what Jon Favreau's doing between Iron Man 1 and 2.
Yeah, Iron Man 2. Well, Iron Man 2 is is probably, I think I do like it. I think it holds together better than Dark World, but I do think it is maybe more the example of, it's literally the first sequel they made, and they're like, how do we make sequels at Marvel? You know, I mean, like, there definitely is this sort of thing where you can feel that movie's a real test case, which I think is that's why I'm also I give it a little bit more like of the benefit of the doubt than some people because people really bash on Iron Man 2. I'm like, nah, there's good stuff there, but it's clearly them going, what's too much world building? What's this? There's a lot of that's an experimental film in a lot of ways.
Sure, I really bash on Iron Man 2. It is my least favorite MCU movie.
Wow. Okay, I strongly now some of that may just be I like Iron Man way more than Thor.
Yeah.
So
and I like Thor way more than Iron Man.
Yeah, that's also a big thing when I love the Taika Thor movies best of all. I always do put the caveat of, I'm not somebody who normally enjoys Thor. So if Taika's movies is inconsistent with your comic book Thor, I'm like, well, I kind of don't like that comic book Thor that you're talking about. So I'm on board for Taika's weird Thor. You know, like I said, I mean, and that is the thing when you get to that. But I do think in terms of, the Spider-Man movies are also really good, but the Guardians movies are literally, I'll put them out of the MCU. This is one of the best trilogies, period, in film history, I think.
I would agree with that, mostly on the grounds that there is such a singular voice in it, and that's something we rarely see in trilogies as a whole. The only other one I can think of off the top of my head is Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. And even that, of course, they have the basis of, they are adapting. It's a singular voice adapting another singular voice, right?
Yeah.
But it is sort of like, because I was having a conversation with somebody probably years ago even, but it is sort of like, there aren't many, and this is not a new statement, but it is sort of like, they're talking about like, what are the good third movies in a trilogy? Because almost every trilogy kind of bobbles that third movie. Even, and I know, guys, but Return of the Jedi has weaknesses. It sticks the big moments, okay?
But
as a movie, it's kind of a mess.
I think the original Star Wars trilogy is an interesting and poignant comparison, because as much as George Lucas is at the helm of all of that, it's not his voice that's coming through in Empire. It's Kasdan's, right?
Kasdan and Kershner.
Yeah.
You've got a writer and a director who both are more interested in people and emotions, who aren't inherently genre filmmakers, and that's why that movie works so well. Is George Lucas has all the lore, but they're going, what do people feel? Mm-hmm. Right? And then Jedi's almost a reaction to that, where he's like, no, I don't like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like, and like I said, I love Jedi, but Jedi is the most discordant of the movies, right?
Well, and you can read the histories of like Lucas basically like ghost directing that film.
Ghost directing it, Kasdan having huge problems with a lot of the stuff Lucas wanted to do. He had a whole different vision for it. Mm-hmm. That's where I think he ceded too much control from him on Empire, right? Like he let too much go, and then I think he kind of didn't like when people are going like, "Hey, is this better?" He's like, "No, this is George Lucas's franchise."
And what's even more fascinating is the trilogy in which Lucas was the sole creative voice. The third movie is kind of the only good one.
That's a weird example where the third one is the only one where I'm like, dude, we should just start it here. His Revenge of the Sith is great. Legitimately. I mean, there's still some clunky George Lucas stuff in it, but it really works. Phantom Menace is, if you think Return of the Jedi is discordant, holy crap, Phantom Menace is a movie with no protagonist. So I do think, but I just think, like, there are a few movies that, few trilogies in general that have the sort of, not only the singular voice of a James Gunn, but also such well-structured themes and arcs across three movies, because this is such one of the reasons this movie is so good is it's so satisfying as an endpoint for where these characters started.
I mean, the line specifically to Rocket being like, "This was your story the whole time," is such a poignant, like, makes you reconsider the last two movies and every other time you've seen Rocket Raccoon up till this point. Like, because this is a Rocket movie, like, top to bottom, even if he's not walking around and getting the most screen time. Like, this movie is so
interesting,
central on him.
I saw this with a friend of a friend who I didn't know very well, who isn't really a Marvel guy, and his first reaction out of the movie was, I like the raccoon the best. Why wasn't he in it more? Yeah, I know, and I don't. It's not a guy I know very well, and I won't talk about who. But, like, it is sort of a thing where I went like, well, the whole movie's about him. Like, it is, but literally he's just going like, well, I don't know, he was unconscious like the whole movie. Yeah.
For those not maybe just listening to this passively, like, the stunned shock on my face might not be reading. I'm trying to.
No,
this is a problem I run into.
This is also a guy
sometimes.
who asked me after seeing this. I haven't seen a lot of these. Is Endgame good?
Ooh.
So,
short answer, yes. Long answer, like, how much time are you willing to put into it? Because,
but it's also one of those things where I'm like, there was just a part of me that went, why did you come see this? Like, you're missing large chunks of the context of this.
This is a problem I run into, and this is going to sound incredibly conceited, so I apologize up front.
Yeah.
I don't know how to grapple with people who are approaching these films passively.
I know.
It's tough for me because my brain just doesn't work like that. I know the vast majority of people who see these movies are just going for the bright colors and the flashing lights, right?
But I think you actually said that in the least conceited way possible, which is, how do you grapple with, like, how do I discuss them with them? It's not like, well, you're doing it wrong, but more just like, it's so hard. That was kind of what I felt with this, where it's like, I don't even know how to talk to you about this movie because you're missing so much of the context. And that's fine. If you're enjoying it, I'm not on that. But in terms of, we're not going to have a very long conversation about the movie then.
Yeah, and I get this sometimes with, like, my dad's in a very similar fashion. Like, when I tried to have a discussion with him about Batman v Superman, I know you defend that movie to a certain extent.
The director's cut specifically. Yeah.
Sure. But, like, he was just like, yeah, it was good when their moms had the same name. I was just like, I don't... I can't with this right now.
Well, I mean, because I do, like, and as I've talked about with that, is like, I think it's clumsily done, but it's a clever idea. But it's a very screenwritery, like, thematic concept that in execution is pretty clunky.
Right. So when somebody comes out of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 saying, I liked the raccoon, I wish he was in it more, and my brain screams, the whole movie was about him. What are you talking about? He is the spine of the film.
But it's just like, I like when the raccoon cracks wise, and he didn't do that as much. You know, I think it's kind of that sort of thing where I'm like, man.
Because this movie's about the raccoon's trauma. It's not about him cracking wise. He cracks wise to cover up the pain. Don't you get it?
And that's always been the case. The thing is, when you talk about it's been a story the whole time, you go back to, the Gunn has always been thinking this, right? It's always been seated in the movies. There's the scene in the first, and this is why he's such a good filmmaker, why this is such a good trilogy, is it wasn't overtly Rocket's story in the last two movies, but you're going, oh man, like you're saying, you reframe, and that's what any good, it's ongoing story should do, is reframe the earlier chapters. Because you think about that first movie, there's that great scene when Quill notices, oh, look at how fucked up Rocket's back is and stuff like that. And then in the second movie, he's pushing the family away because now he's becoming part of this family, and so he's being shitty because he doesn't want to get too attached to being one of the Guardians.
He doesn't want to risk losing it again,
Yeah, and this whole movie is about that. And this is, I mean, I once again, we're right on the edges, but I think this might be the best of these movies, and in some ways because of a cumulative effect, right? You just go like, you realize how, I think just this, I say magic trick even though it seems obvious, but because so many third parts bobble it, when you go like, my God, look at how well this thing brings all of this together so it works as one big story, is so rarely done that I think I was just so impressed with it on that level.
And I guess that's the advantage that this movie has over, say, the Spider-Man trilogy or the Captain America movies. Because I agree that I think Captain America, I just like those movies more than the Guardians films.
I mean, there's no question, and anyone who knows me and hears me talk about these movies knows the Captain America movies are, that's my jam, particularly the two made by the Russo brothers. I mean, I think Winter Soldier is just one of my favorite action movies, period.
I would agree with that statement.
That movie is incredible.
But the Spider-Man trilogy and the Cap trilogy do less of the recontextualizing that you're talking about in terms of making one larger ongoing story. They tell a good series of events in these characters' lives and lead up to fun conclusions with each of the characters. And Cap, it gets messier because obviously his story doesn't actually wrap up until Endgame. But it is so satisfying at the end of this film when all of our Guardians are kind of getting their happy ending. And for Rocket specifically, that happy ending is being the patriarch, the father, the group leader, the captain of this squad that he was kind of been like grading sandpaper like against for 2 movies.
Well, and that's what's so interesting about also what that does, because I mean, the two main characters have always been Rocket and Star-Lord, right? I mean, it is essentially through them, and the realization. And
I would argue Gamora as well, but
Gamora and Gamora, particularly when you bring in the context of Infinity War, right? Like Gamora and Nebula, and we'll talk about Nebula in a second, because Nebula is such basically almost wholly a gun creation. Like what the expansion on that character and how much more important she is in the MCU than she is in the comics is insane. And so much of that is obviously due to the amazing acting of Karen Gillan as well. But the thing I was going to say is I think it's so interesting the way we leave Rocket and Star-Lord in this movie, where it is Star-Lord realizing Rocket needs the Guardians, and maybe he doesn't need to be the captain. That's not where his journey is taking him.
Or specifically that, like, the family that he's created in the Guardians is just a coping mechanism for the pain that he's been shoving down in the same way that Rocket has.
And seeing Rocket complete his journey inspires him to confront his own trauma.
Right.
And it makes it so satisfying. And it's here's the thing I always think about endings is, and this movie so does this. At the end of this movie, when he goes back to Earth, I go, I didn't think about that, but that is always where his story was going. It's one of those things where you go like, of course. The thing about, and this is the big thing I want to talk about in terms of like expectations, was all the conversation coming in this movie was, who's going to die? Which one of them's going to die? And none of them die.
One of the thoughts I had walking out of this movie was this thought that they could have so easily killed off some of these characters and have it feel earned. And I'm sure James Gunn could have done that in a way that made us feel emotionally devastated and like would have accepted it for what it was. But the fact that every character in this movie gets a happy ending, like, starts wearing away the cynicism that people always accuse Gunn of, right? And leans into that pathos that I think
this has always been something
he doesn't get enough credit for.
No, and it's always something I push back on when people talk about Gunn being cynical. It's like, he's never been cynical. He is snarky, but always, it's all I mean, it's the reason he talked about Rocket as the character he's most connected to in anything he's ever done, which is snark that is covering up deep sincerity. I think he is one of the most heartfelt filmmakers working in Hollywood. But it is always surface level snark. All of his movies. I mean, dude, there's not a Gunn movie I've seen where I didn't cry at some point in it, because he always is doing that. But it's always this like shell of, he writes. I think it's interesting. He writes about cynical characters, but his movies aren't cynical at all. In fact, quite the opposite. And so I think that's always the thing when I have heard people go like, "Oh, he's a very cynical filmmaker." I'm like, no, he wears his heart on his sleeve, man. It is so clear. He writes about wounded characters who cover up their hearts, though.
Right, and I think that is a big distinction to make, is the difference between how the characters act and what the film as a whole is trying to get at, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's always this thing about, it's a big thing I always bring up, too, about like when people talk about content in movies or language in movies, and I'm going, portrayal is not endorsement, right? Because you have characters doing something, you as a filmmaker aren't saying, that's how I choose to live. You're portraying characters.
Right. I think that's an interesting conversation around this movie right now, is its portrayal specifically of violence against animals. And it is such
a big thing. I've seen a lot
issue.
of things.
I was just reading an article this morning about a group arguing that this movie should be rated R because of the intensity which it treats violence against animals. And I think that mostly comes down to the fact that like people are underselling what a PG-13 movie should be most of the time.
Well, it's also yes, and that's a big thing about this. Like, it's, and I've seen this before about movies should be rated R, but you're like, if you just look, if you're treating the rating system as what is shown on screen, right? There's not a lot of graphic things shown on screen. It is so absolutely disturbing in concept what is happening.
Yes,
and that is very. And it is, and there were several points in the movie when I went, I really applaud Disney and Marvel for letting Gunn take this movie into as dark a subject matter as it does. But I don't think he ever comes close to crossing into R-rated territory.
No,
it's all just it is very difficult to deal with. There's no question. It is rough stuff.
The most upsetting characters to look at on a regular basis are Rocket while he's in captivity and his 3 animal friends, right? And they're meant to be upsetting to look at because of how they have been mistreated and tortured and used for experimentation. And the fact that we mostly see them laughing and playing together despite their abominable appearance is this dichotomy that the movie is playing off of, right? Of just like where the roots of pain come from and the horrors of people's past and what it makes them is something that most people aren't usually confronted with in Marvel movies.
No, and also the idea of trauma isn't the thing that defines you, right? Even in the movie is about the triumph of the human spirit, whether that be in
human, quote unquote,
yeah. I mean, in as much as any sci-fi movie is about humans, right? But the idea of that in that, as you're talking about, even in this horrible, torturous life, that they find love and happiness, and then seeing that, and of course the beautiful reflection of that to the Guardians as well, and going back and forth. With that stuff, I love the way that the flashbacks are interspersed throughout the movie and stuff like that. I think is much better than had it been like a quick prologue or something like that. Which and Gunn has talked about. He goes, the whole reason I had to make this movie was to tell the Rocket story, the Rocket origin story specifically. And Gunn, I know if you follow Gunn on any social media, this dude is an animal lover, man. He's always showing up with pets and things like that. But I do think it's an interesting discussion, right? And this is always a thing about why is content in movies, and everything in this movie is for a purpose. All of that, by the end of the movie, you need to go through the trauma of it, and it is rough. And I have seen the people going, this comment always is like, I can't take my kids. Number one, it's still a PG-13, and number two, who the hell said it was for kids?
Yeah, it's the assumption that all movies under a Marvel banner should be appropriate for children of all ages is an assumption that people make that I never understood. Because, like, right out of the gate, we're dealing with an alcoholic misanthrope, and, like, I don't know that these movies were for little kids ever.
Well, and the other thing is, and I always come back to this, is obviously know your kid, right? Some kids,
Yeah.
you know, there are some 6-year-olds who will be fine with this movie. There are some 13-year-olds who will be traumatized by it. It's all about, you got to know. At a certain point, movies exist, and you as a parent need to choose what you want, you know, sort of thing where it's like, or also, another way to look at it too is if your kid is really upset by this, how about you talk to them about why this happens in the movie, what they're feeling. Maybe a kid having an emotional reaction is kind of a good thing to a movie.
We can't have discussions with our children about how they feel, John. That would require character growth and intimacy between parent and child.
Or take them to Super Mario Brothers, and they don't have to really. I mean, no offense to that movie, but
Sure.
I think that's a much easier time at the cinema.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This film does deal with those, like, bits of trauma in a very visceral way that, yeah, maybe the body horror of this film, because that's what it is when you get right down to it, is not something that has been approached in Marvel movies past, but to say that they shouldn't be allowed to do that is disingenuous to the source material and to
or
the
that we should
people
start
involved.
limiting the audience with an R rating, which is, I mean, I'm sorry, like I said, there's nothing in this movie that crosses into R-rated territory. It is all very viscerally, psychologically disturbing.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is the case. And I think the movie is appropriately rated PG-13. And it's rare that the MPAA is too lax on stuff, so I think that's always very dumb.
And we can get into talks about, like, how the MPAA is bullshit to begin with, but that's
what I mean. So it's sort of like, if you think they didn't go far enough, man, that is a weird statement, because 9 times out of 10 they have been way too harsh on a movie.
Right. Yeah, that's not to say that this should be PG or anything, but I think PG-13 perfectly fits.
This is absolutely a PG-13. I think especially if you're, you know, 13 and up, you can absolutely handle what's here. But also, like I said, I mean, I know plenty of adults who will be very disturbed by this, but content doesn't exist in a vacuum. Images don't exist in a vacuum in a film. They shouldn't, right? So you do have to wrestle always with, what is this movie asking of me when it's showing me these difficult things?
I was so struck. I watched this movie with my partner last night, and we were coming out of it. She was saying, I never thought a superhero movie could make me cry this much. I'm like, oh, so the animal stuff didn't bother you too much? And she said, no, Baby Rocket saying pain will be scarred on my soul forever.
Wow.
Because it's very traumatic. It's very affecting. And it's like, it is.
I can't get past the didn't think a superhero movie make you cry. I'm always weeping at these things.
My thought at that was, though, is that's so impressive to me because she's not as deeply bought into this stuff as effectively our modern religion, John. Because let's be honest, like, we absorb this shit like some people absorbed the Bible back in the 50s.
Dude, I just straight up, I mean, this is my church, man. Batman is my Lord and Savior. I own this.
Right.
I don't even need to couch it anything. This is Marvel is my Bible.
I know Marvel stuff like some preachers know gospel. Like,
yeah, absolutely. No, that's 100% the case.
To have somebody have a reaction as visceral as that, not living that experience, is, I think, a tribute to how good of a triumph this movie is.
No, I mean, that's the thing, is just like, and I think that's why we always talk about critics and sort of the negative reaction a lot of these Marvel movies get. I almost feel like the reaction of this movie is a lot of arm-shouldered critics going like, well, it was good, damn it. I can't, like, and there are of course a handful of people who just won't. I've heard the thing, but like they're a lot of the criticisms are pretty lazy, or just like, well, this movie meanders. Why isn't it more focused? It keeps jumping around to stuff, and it's like,
what?
Oh, man. Yeah, the story's all over the place. And
no, it's not.
Or the biggest one I've seen is that really pissed me off was somebody called it James Gunn has mistaken schmaltz for emotion. And it's like, that's on you, man. That's you just going, no.
I don't. Yeah. If I started addressing those criticisms, we'd be here all day.
No, it is sort of the thing. But and of course, there's people who, I mean, I just want to, but like, once again, it's somebody going, people just going like, no, they're capitalist, corporate made bullshit. And you're just going like, that, you went in with that attitude. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry, that's not that. Anybody can have an opinion on a movie, but that's not a valid criticism of this movie. I'm sorry, it's just not. That is wrong. It's clearly a movie made by a filmmaker. Like,
if that's your opinion on films in general, fine. Yeah. Then I guess we're just not enjoying movies made by studios anymore.
Well, that's the thing. I was gonna go. Then like 90% of film is just out the window.
Yeah,
we always talk about this. It is the brilliance that is found in studio filmmaking is artists working inside of a corporate system. We've always talked about this. It is literally from the inception of this as an industry, that has been the push and pull of the art versus commerce. And so to call yourself enough of a film fan to be a professional critic, how can you not look at that? It's just insane, because it's like, I enjoy those Transformers movies, but like, no, there you go. That's corporate IP, okay, man. Like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, we don't come out with a movie called Rise of the Beast and introduce the Beast Wars characters because we think it's integral to the story.
No, and that's fine. If you want to make that criticism, I will be there for Rise of the Beast. I think it looks rad as hell. But that's, but I go, that's a totally different mindset I go into.
Slight diversion.
Yeah.
Why are they introducing Galvatron in a Beast Wars movie? It just doesn't make any goddamn sense to me, but whatever.
You mean Unicron?
Unicron, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I get your Transformers. No,
Galvatron was the resurrected version of Megatron. I know this. Okay.
They already did that in the last last night. So don't worry. I have no idea, and I at this point, I just go and watch the robots punch each other. Really, at this,
Sure, fine. Back to Guardians 3.
Yeah, back to Guardians 3. But like I'm saying, that's sort of the thing where it's like, yes, this is not that. I do want to talk about, on the point of the dramatic imagery, I don't know that I've truly hated a Marvel villain more than the High Evolutionary. Like, there are ones who are more maybe objectively like mass evil, like a Red Skull or something like that, but just pure, I despise this person. High Evolutionary.
What's interesting, the interesting difference, I think Red Skull is a perfect example of unambiguously evil characters. And I think something that the Marvel films have sort of leaned away from, and I think Black Panther was a big start to this, was understanding a bad guy's methodology to the point where you could objectively like back away and go like, okay, but they've got some good points. And even like Thanos had that to a certain extent.
Absolutely. I mean,
it's where the whole Thanos was right thing comes from.
Yeah, those people are wrong because he was wrong. But I understand the fact that anyone would have that thought is a testament to that screenwriting. And Thanos, they did make very human. And you bring up Black Panther, and Killmonger is still my #1 Marvel villain, because
even like Gore the God Butcher, like, okay, the gods like are kind of cruel and callous. Also, and you get where he's coming from.
You're hitting all my top 5 villains, because Gore the God Butcher's in there. The Vulture, I thought, also very human.
Absolutely.
Like, I just want my piece of the pie, man. And I think High Evolutionary is a really interesting one, because the thing is, he is so flawed. I understand what he's doing, but it's such a flawed premise, right? To make people perfect.
Right. And Rocket sums it up perfectly at the end of the movie when he says, like, you don't want to make things better, you just don't like what's there.
Yeah. And you see this idea that this is this cyclical thing. I keep making a society, it keeps going into the same inevitable thing, so I burn it down and start again. Yeah, it's actually a lot of the same stuff I love in Serenity as well, specifically the movie Serenity, where it's just like, and I love that, where it's like, eventually you will come around to the idea again that you can make people better.
Right. The idea that you can have an unambiguously straight up evil bad guy is not new to the MCU experiment. The Red Skull, certainly again, great example. I think what sets the High Evolutionary apart from the rest of them that we've seen up to this point is that we get so much of his methodology and like the exact nature of the shit he's putting the people who suffer under him through. Because as evil as the Red Skull is, we don't see him perpetrating in supervillainy outside of just like offhandedly killing his own minions, and that feels a little detached. And like he kills that one priest at the beginning of the movie, I guess, but like,
that's just to get the cosmic, you know, it's like it's all sort of, it's this endless, with him it is just broad power that he's seeking on a you know, non-specific way. It's just like all domination, right?
But we don't necessarily see the people suffering because of his ambitions, as opposed to the High Evolutionary.
Yeah, that's the thing, where it's like you are seeing, you understand his broad, it is both broad and intimate, right? It is this is my big goal, and here's all the horrible individual things I'm doing to get there. And the thing I said I really like about it is, I'm like, well, I disagree with your broad goal. Thanos is at least, I'm going, oh, I understand your broad goal, and you're not entirely wrong. Killmonger is even more that, and that is why he's my favorite, where I'm like, you are like 90% right.
Yeah.
You are so close to there, but then it's just like, you just dip off into insanity at the end there. You're like, so we got to kill everybody. You're like, oh, wait a minute now.
Yeah, and Namor's even closer to that, where it's like, okay, you totally also, get where Namor's coming from. He's just amazing. Like very, very aggressive in how he gets there, and he's a bit of a tool. One
of the early criticisms of Marvel, and I always thought it was more of a mixed bag than people, was always that they didn't have good villains. And I think it's not like every early Marvel villain was bad. Or you have characters like Whiplash, where I feel like, oh, there was a good character, but then he kind of like falls into cliche, you know. But I do think, particularly in the last two phases, they have really nailed these villains for the most part.
Right. And obviously the big caveat for that whole conversation is Loki, right?
Yeah. Well, Loki really, I mean, Loki is such a, whenever I always see him at the top of like Marvel villains, I'm like, yeah, but that's a cheat now, because he's literally a villain who's become a hero. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's the thing where it's like, he is so interesting because we've actually seen him run the full spectrum from bad guy to good guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it is sort of a thing where it's like, yeah, Loki almost has to be like placed over here. Loki's his own thing. It's in the Magneto when people say Magneto's their favorite villain, I'm always like, yeah, villain is really, you know, it's really demeaning to this guy.
I don't know how caught up you are on recent X-Men stuff, John.
Pretty close. Yeah, pretty I mean, yeah.
You've read the most recent X-Men read up to the AVXVE or whatever?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So you know, like, where Magneto's at and like what he went out on.
Yeah.
Because as of right now in the comics, Magneto is dead. Maybe there's some recent issues that are literally dropping this week that may or may not go back on that. We'll see. But
I mean, whether it happens next week or 2 years from now, he'll be back. But
that's fair. That's fair.
But yes, he is, and I've enjoyed all that stuff, and I like the trial of Magneto and.
But the whole, like, Magneto going to Mars and trying to remove himself from the equation as, like, the retired guy. It's like Magneto stopped being a bad guy in the 70s.
He is legitimately one of my favorite characters in all of comics, Magneto, because he is so complicated. And also in the way that I was talking about Thor in the comics, you know, sporadically, Thor is really a character that I read based on who's writing it and what their take is. But always across the board, I always found Loki more interesting because of what we're talking about. He is so unpredictable. I like characters who aren't wholly good or bad. Those are often the characters I'm most drawn to. It's why I love stuff like Breaking Bad or The Sopranos or things like that. Anti-hero gets thrown around too much. People call Deadpool an anti-hero. I'm like, that guy's just a hero. He just kills people is what that means a lot, you know. The Punisher is an anti-hero. Sure, when he's in a Daredevil book, when you're reading a Punisher book, he's just supposed to be the hero, and maybe you think he's too violent, but you know.
But the big difference with the High Evolutionary in this film is that you were given this permission structure by the film to unambiguously hate this motherfucker.
One I love, we were just learning how to say his name.
Chukwudi Iwuji.
Yeah, even he goes like, you're supposed to be able to defend your kid. He goes, I can't defend this guy. I'm sorry. He goes, even though I played him, there's nothing redeeming about him. Because it is one of those things where even if he succeeded in making the perfect world, I'm sorry, it's not worth it. It's not the perfect world because you sacrificed so much and destroyed so many lives to get there. So even if you, which I also believe that, once again, what makes him interesting is it's impossible to create what he's trying to create. But even if he somehow did, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, there are too many dead bodies in the foundations of what he's doing.
Yeah,
for it to be morally justified. Yeah,
but it also always gets to the point that I like in stuff, like I mentioned, Serenity and stuff like that, where it's like, no, you can't make people perfect. They will still be dealing meth in the back of an. I love that scene. That whole sequence on Counter Earth is hilarious.
The fact that we got Counter Earth in a movie, it blows my mind.
The other thing, and I mean that's another thing too, is I was impressed by how I was proud of Marvel and Disney for letting them make the movies dark as this. I was also proud of them for making the movie how weird it is. All the Guardians movies have been weird, but this one is so weird. And can we talk about how hilarious Nathan Fillion is in this movie? and that whole sequence, is so, because the other thing is, I feel like we've been focusing on a lot of the themes and the trauma and the darkness, but this movie's hilarious too.
This movie is very, very funny. All of the Orgo Corp stuff, the weird flesh space station they go to, was so weird, so out there, so colorful, and vibrant and gross, and like the whole part where they're cutting into the airlock chamber was just like, it looks like a big zit that they're popping to get in, and it was so gross.
Man. It's hilarious, man. It's so funny. And it's so weird, and it's so only James Gunn would even think to do this. But then you've got Nathan Fillion as head of security, who's just like kind of a working stiff, going like, "Yeah, I got the boss's cousin or whatever on my." This guy's an idiot.
Oh, you've got an idiot on your team? Yeah, I've got one on mine.
I love it, and then he says it again. He goes, "So you got working with an idiot? Pff, yeah, I got one of those." You know, like I just love the idea of the working stiff on the crazy, organic space station. Is just like, geez, another day, man. Am I right?
All the Guardians movies have done such a good job of having these workaday side characters as be like, look, the audience, you're seeing this weird, crazy universe that you're getting introduced to. Most of these people just live here.
That is a thing that always goes to making a crazy fantasy or sci-fi world work to me. We talked about that when we reviewed Dungeons and Dragons. Just the blasé attitude really helps, that everybody's just like, yeah, dragon. This shit happens. Like, it's just, here we go. It's something we love, and that we always bring up, that we love in the Marvel comics, where it's just like, oh, what's this, traffic jam? Yeah, Spider-Man's fighting the Rhino. Oh, Christ, I'm going to be late to work. Like, at a certain point, no matter what, if you live in that world, it becomes another day.
One of my favorite dialogue exchanges is between Jessica Jones and Iron Man in the Young Avengers comic, when Iron Man says like, "Oh, I think this is a Kang thing," and Jessica Jones goes like, "Oh, I hate Kang things."
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like, no matter how crazy the world gets, at a certain point, if that consistently is the thing, eventually people are going to roll their eyes at it.
Yeah, no. And so when you have Nathan Fillion being like, "Oh, this workaday," or one of my favorite bits in the movie, and something you just never see when it comes to these supervillains, whether it be in a Marvel movie, in a DC movie, or even like in a James Bond movie, when the minions in the climactic scene are just like, our leader has gone nuts and we need to shut this down. And obviously it doesn't come to anything ultimately, because the High Evolutionary just kills everybody. But like that scene where the other recorder turns on him and gets the whole bridge crew to be like, "We need to stop. You have gone mad," was so just like, oh, you just never see that in movies.
Yeah, where it's just like, yeah, I'm really not on board with any of this. That's Miriam Shore is the actress who plays that. And that's a small but vital role in this movie, I feel like. And she's a really good character actress. She's in a million things. I also love seeing Nico Santos, who we love from Superstore.
Yeah.
And he's from here. He's in Oregon. He's an Oregonian, which I also...
nice.
He grew up in Gresham, so love that guy. And he has a great, fun role in this.
Yeah, as the other recorder, Thiel.
Yeah. Who is sort of more the sycophant to High Evolutionary,
and gets maybe the most brutal death in the movie.
Yeah.
Like he does not go out clean.
No. It's pretty brutal. But he kind of has it coming because he's way on board with mass torture and genocide.
Yeah, that's true. That'll do it.
I do want to just to make sure we cover as much as we can here. Should we talk about Adam Warlock?
Yeah, I mean, Will Poulter.
Love this guy.
Love this guy. His Adam Warlock is not the Adam Warlock of the comic books, and I can only imagine what Brendan Jones had to say about this Adam Warlock. But
I don't even think I need to tell you. I think you do know coming out of this. But as I said to him in rebuttal, Adam Warlock is Space Jesus. We all know this.
Yes. Well, in the comics, honestly, John, I don't think we all know this, because at this point, Adam Warlock is such a weird niche cosmic Marvel character.
He is.
Like, there was a time in the 80s where he was a very important character in ongoing Marvel storytelling.
And a lot of that was in the Infinity War stuff. And I've even seen Marvel nerds online going, why would you introduce him now after Thanos? He has no purpose anymore. I'm like, wow, what a dismissal of Adam Warlock.
I think he's an interesting character to still have around because he still can tie us to Infinity War stuff. Obviously, they've changed his origin story in this too.
Yeah.
Like, he's just pretty much a different character with the same aesthetics. But I can say that about
Much
every
like
character
all
in
the
Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah.
But the thing I was going to say about what I said to our friend who's I love Brendan Jones. He's very committed to, as he always says, he is the keeper of the flame of source material. He also had a lot of opinions about certain costumes in this movie. And they may have been almost immediately the thing he said when the movie ended. This is going to put him on a journey, right? I don't know that Adam Warlock will ever become the Space Jesus of the comics, but they've started him very far out from that. And in terms of seeing this character across many movies, I want to see him grow and change. So this idea of, I also love the way they connected back to Guardians Volume 2 with the Sovereign and Elizabeth Debicki, who is an actress I love, and this whole idea of once again, he is part of the themes of this movie with the perfection, right? The Sovereign, consider them. I also love this. It's not a retcon, but just sort of this reveal that the High Evolutionary created the Sovereign, right? And it's like, oh, he created this thing, but they just kind of think they're perfect. They're actually shitty, as they were, as we saw in the.
He created them with this idea of perfection that he has in mind, and they were instilled with that idea that they were the perfect, in the same way that like Rocket and Teefs and Lila and all of them is like, oh, we're gonna go live on the perfect world once it gets this right, and the Sovereign are just the next, they're batch number 237 or whatever.
But they're all arrogance because they have this knowledge of perfection, and it's always just like, yeah, but then they just suck. They're all about opulence and glamour, right? And
if they had been raised to their like potential, all the children of the corn at the end of this movie would have also been like having that opinion of themselves.
Totally, because that's the thing. Also, it's within perfection. If you know you're perfect, then why would you give a crap about anyone else? Anyway, I love all that stuff, but the idea of Gunn writes him as a child. He has all these powers, all this thing, but he has no world experience, no understanding of anything. I love when he gets hurt and he's like, ow, it hurts. What? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And then through meeting the Guardians and seeing the humanity that is quote unquote imperfect, he starts to go, oh, wait, maybe that's actually more what I connect with. And that will start him on his journey of becoming a hero.
Right. And I think it is a fun back door to leave open if you know your comic mythology to get us back to, if they want to, Infinity Stone stuff, right? Because classically Adam Warlock is connected to Soul Stone, and like there's some questions about like how the Soul Stone affected people in Infinity War and Endgame, and like there's threads there that you could pick up and play with down the road if you wanted to.
Always the smartest thing about Feige and the creatives at Marvel is they're always just leaving doors open for themselves, and sometimes they may never connect to. I mean, talk about Red Skull. I remember for years people were like, well, I don't understand, where'd he go at the end of that? And it's not until Infinity War they're like, there he is.
Yeah.
And you're like,
No.
oh wow, that was the thing where it's like they're not gonna it's the same thing with when are they gonna do the X-Men? It's like when it's time.
Yeah.
We know. You think we don't? I always talk about that when people get on like Marvel didn't do this. Like, do you think Kevin Feige doesn't know that's what happened in the comics? They know what happened in the comics. Like,
Right.
people always act like it's just like no, they are so smart, and their first thought is always what works for the movies. Like it's the whole Marvel attitude is not being slavish, and it is. Was it somebody? Who did I hear talking about this? That it's almost like a buffet, right? Where they have all this stuff in front of them, and they go, we could borrow a little bit of that and put this in there too, and you just kind of. If you have all of the history of the Marvel comics, they can just grab that, merge it with this, put that there, go there.
I think the Nebula Gamora relationship is the perfect example of this, right? Because like all of those bits of just like being raised by Thanos and like their associations with the Black Order and all that other stuff, like that was all like over the years that developed in the comic books over decades of history, and like condensing it all into one streamlined story makes it affecting and important and eminent in the story that we're being told right now, especially the Nebula Gamora relationship that we see over the course of this movie, which I love is just grunts at each other of respect.
It's everything. I love all that stuff too. But it's sort of a thing where it's like all that stuff is, I recognize as story I know from the comics, but like I never felt it this way in the comics. It never, because comics have other things. It's always the thing we talk about when going from medium to medium, right? And comics can and at their best do, but don't generally have the visceral emotional impact of a movie, I should say, right? Because it is about ever progressing forward. So comics rarely get the chance to slow down and breathe into moments because they're ever building towards the next big thing. And that's, and once again, always, as we've talked about for years doing podcasts, when I say comics, I am colloquially meaning American superhero comics. I understand this.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm talking about Marvel. Let's talk about Marvel comics specifically. Like it is sort of like so, but then when you're able to look at that from a more zoomed out perspective, when they have all this stuff to pick from, you can then go, as James Gunn, hey, that's something. This relationship exists. What if I really dug in and explored that and what that has done to you? And I mean, this. The fun superhero movies for the kids, right? All these movies are about trauma. They always have been, because it's the trauma of what Thanos did to these two people. And honestly, you talk about things I would never have guessed. The idea of how affecting and interesting the arc of Nebula is insane, man. Where she is here from where we met her, what a journey we've been on with her.
In Guardians 1, she was the heavy for the main bad guy who had a personal stake in the conflict, and that was it.
And left the movie with a like, until next time, Guardians.
Yeah.
And I kind of just went like, okay. And even Gunn, this is a perfect example of, it's not like Gunn, because we always talk about, the problem is people don't have visions for their trilogies. It's not that, because Gunn even talked about it, he goes, I didn't know I was going to use Nebula as much as I did. It was just upon seeing how good Karen Gillan was that I started to go, I could write more stuff. I could do this with her. I could do that. It is sort of like,
Guardians 2 is where that onion really starts to unravel, right?
And purely because he saw this character and saw the potential in it within that movie. And also I saw somebody, I was watching an interview with the cast, and they said, what's the best direction you've gotten from James Gunn? And Karen Gillan said, it's the best direction from her from him was the creation of the whole take on the character, she said, which is she came in playing it like a very arch, like Flash Gordon-y villain, and he goes, no, you're Marilyn Monroe, but you talk like Clint Eastwood. And she goes, got it. And she goes, that is still like everything in the physicality is that sort of slinky thing, but then it's very this, and it's just like, she just goes, just like, boom, there's that character. And that instantly, just that note made her slightly more interesting than other villains. And then you add in the Gamora connection, and then he starts to go this to that to this. and then it creates this amazing character who's hugely important in Avengers movies and is such a central character in this. By the way, love her sweet new arm in this movie that does all that cool stuff.
Yeah, she was a little bit of the Deus Ex Machina, quite literally, in this movie, but that's fine. You need somebody to tech the tech, and why not have it be Gamora?
Somebody has to tech
Nebula.
the tech. Yeah, I mean, it is like... This is the thing about Chris McQuarrie, one of my all-time filmmaking heroes who makes the Mission Impossible movies, talks about, like, at a certain point, you just need somebody to get a thing to go somewhere, right?
Right,
Like,
yeah. Sometimes Nebula needs to put her cool arm in the hole where the spaceship controls used to be.
It's just like, I don't really care why they have to get this thing. They just have to get there so that their character's story can continue, right? Like, it's just...
Right, yeah.
Some writers get lost in, like, but why would he be able to do that to this? Is like, stop. The arm does a cool thing, and we're because this movie, by the way, I'm as somebody who always complains that movies are too long, 2.5 hours, and this movie cooks.
Yeah, like, I really didn't find any place in this movie where it lulls. That's why, like, a complaint that this movie is meandering seems insane to me, because there is, like, one mission, and we're doing it the whole time.
And every character is well served. I think the reason it earns its 2.5 hours is because to cut anything would make this movie would cheapen someone's character arc. And the Guardians are, at their core, really an ensemble movie. They are team films. So everybody feels... I'm so satisfied with where everyone goes, including even, like, how important Kraglin is. And he's firmly a side character, and yet all the stuff with him and Cosmo is just great.
And Cosmo, who was introduced in the Christmas special, which I like how they bring some of that stuff back.
Hey, man, the Christmas special is kind of important to see this movie. The other thing that just in terms of, like, the Nebula thing, Gunn seizing upon how good the chemistry between Drax and Mantis is on the Christmas special.
Yeah, I mean...
them as a duo is just fantastic.
Palm Clementif is just fantastic in this movie. I mean, Dave Bautista obviously branded as Drax. I don't think his performance has really gotten better or worse over these movies. I think he has just maintained great the whole time.
He had it from moment one. He just had this character, and what a great character right out the gate.
But all of the Mantis stuff that we got in Guardians 2 really doesn't pay off until the Christmas special, right? I think that relationship so solidifies in that special, and then we get her at peak Mantis throughout this movie as well, which I loved.
It's fantastic, and she's become so integral, and another character who I think basically earned their importance in the story just through the performance of the actor, and James Gunn going, oh, that's interesting. I mentioned Mission Impossible earlier. I can't wait for her to play a villain in the new Mission Impossible movie. That's going to be really interesting. Yeah, she's one of the main villains in it, and that's going to be way interesting because that's so far away from Mantis, obviously, as being any kind of nefarious character. So,
you talk about Kraglin. Can we talk about Sean Gunn for a second?
Oh. A man who has just sailed through Hollywood as this weird character actor. And talk about guys who it's like, I didn't think he would be as integral to this series as I thought he was going to be when we were introduced to him in Guardians 1. He has a handful of lines as just the guy who stands next to Yondu in that first movie, really, right?
Yeah. It's a good thing we didn't bring him to his dad. Yeah, that guy was a jackass.
Yeah, right. And who knew what that was going to turn into a whole thing. And, of course, he also, as people talk about, does do the mocap for Rocket.
Right. I think that's what I want to talk about is that, like, while Kraglin is a fun character, the fact that every other actor in this movie on set is reacting to Sean Gunn as Rocket, I think is not as widely reported on as it should be, because he's the guy that everyone else is acting against on set, right?
Right.
Like, Bradley, not to diminish Bradley Cooper's performance, I think he does a good job.
And I think he's particularly amazing in this, having to play young Rocket and older Rocket, and I mean, he plays Rocket. He's had way more to do in this than he ever has in terms of that character, and has always just been an amazing performance, simply because it's not just a celebrity doing a voice. It's not just like, I'm Bradley Cooper, I'm playing it's a real character in the voice. I think the combination of Sean Gunn's physicality and Bradley Cooper's voice is amazing.
Right.
But yes, Sean Gunn, you look at any on-set footage or pictures, there's Sean Gunn in a green suit on his knees.
But I think he is such an integral part of these movies that is a little undersold. And the fact that he got a name and a character and like a fun like arc to go on just as his own face is a fun bit of this movie that like gives him some recognition, despite the fact that I think most audiences wouldn't know how integral he is to the making of these films.
Well, and I like that. I mean, he, you know, certainly he has a lot of notoriety and fame from Gilmore Girls, where he was a beloved character, and I like that there's clearly like you know, Nathan Fillion put him in an episode of The Rookie. Chris Pratt brought him into his Amazon show, The Terminal List. Like there is this sort of a thing where it's like this guy is such a specific energy. Oh no way, he did a voice in Lollipop Chainsaw. Who would have guessed? But it is sort of a thing where it's like he is such a specific thing, and it is when I see him, I go, hey. Like that guy, he's kind of like Two Dyke in that way too, right? Where it's sort of like, hey, guys who maybe not everyone knows their names, and they do a lot of stuff that you don't even see their faces in, but there is such a great body of work from doing that, and I can't wait. And of course, he was Weasel. He was the mocap for Weasel in Suicide Squad, and he's gonna be in Creature Commandos, the animated show that James Gunn is doing.
I fully expect him to play Jimmy Olsen in the Superman movie.
That's an old Jimmy Olsen, man. A young Superman and an old Jimmy Olsen. But I guarantee you he'll probably be on staff at the Daily Planet at the very least.
Yeah, that's fair.
But he's playing both Weasel and G.I. Robot in Creature Commandos, so...
Interesting.
Yeah, Creature Commandos is going to be insane.
Where's Alan Tudyk's Marvel role?
I know. Well, he is... I mean... Surprise, surprise! He's the voice of Dr. Phosphorus in said Creature Commandos.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's like no. That's the character actor that like he's all over Disney stuff because he's like their good luck totem or something.
Yeah.
But he has yet to show up in, and he was obviously K2 in Rogue One, and I'm sure we'll see more of him in season 2 of Andor. But
like, yeah. There's no he's definitely but he has yet to be in a Marvel thing.
Yeah, that just surprises me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly been... He's actually been all over DC, weirdly.
Yeah,
because he was on
and stuff.
He was on Doom Patrol, and he does voices on Harley Quinn.
Harley Quinn, yeah.
And he also plays Alfred on the Batman Audio Adventures, which I keep recommending to people. People need to listen to the Batman Audio Adventures. It's great. Yeah, and then also coming into Creature Commandos, who seems to be part of this whole team, is Maria Bakalova, who plays Cosmo in this, who I love. She's great.
I did like the running, like, I am not a bad dog.
Well, I love anytime... I never get tired of the thing, and it's the same thing with Brian on Family Guy, when you have these well-spoken animal characters who still have animal things in them, and so, like, if a dog could talk, it would be deeply offended by bad dog. And just the whole movie going... And it's one of those things that's such a screenwriting thing, and you know the movie will end with him saying "good dog," but you want it. Like it's a thing where you know, and then when it happens, you're like, yeah. And also the fact that it comes from smashing a guy between two pieces of cement.
Oh, telekinetic dog is fun.
Telekinetic dog is fun, and all that stuff is great. Also love that we get some of the Ravagers here, and of course my lifelong hero Sylvester Stallone shows back up. This is some more complicated space stuff that you know he's like, what the fuck?
I think he had some trouble with some of those lines.
Have you seen that outtake from the second movie where he can't say the word Ravager? He keeps going Ravager. He keeps saying Ravager. It's great. Boy. And he just again and again and again, and then finally he just goes, "All right, I will see you in looping." It's very funny.
Looping is where you do the recording later and try to match it to the lips, yeah.
But I just love the idea about, like, I've been doing this long enough. I am not going to get
it. Moving on.
But he obviously has become part of the James Gunn ensemble also. I mean, his performance as King Shark, amazing. So, yeah, and he's very fun here. And also we got him in the full Starhawk helmet at one point, which made me very happy.
Yeah, we got all the OG Guardians showing up a couple of times in this film. I enjoyed that.
Well, I like that their inclusion, and I mean, when this movie just turns into a heist movie for a section, and they have to bring the Ravagers in, and you get all the kind of, not all of them, but a lot of the OG Guardians.
Yeah, Vance Astro's not kicking around, but...
No, but you get back, you get Michael Rosenbaum back as Martin X. I do like that another James Gunn regular, Molly C. Quinn, her character is credited just as Molly Ravager.
There are a couple of characters in this movie that, like, Sarah Alamani Alami is her character is credited as Salar Alami.
There's also a guy who's just credited as Gamora shoots this guy! Exclamation point. It's pretty great.
Pretty good.
Also, the amazing it's something Gunn has been on social media really praising is the work of all the actors who did the mocap performances for the other animals with Rocket, which is Linda Cardellini, Asim Chouardi, and Michaela Hoover.
Did they do the mocap, or did they also just do the voices?
They did both mocap and voices.
Interesting. Because Linda Cardellini actually struck me as odd, and I don't know how I feel about it. Like, don't get me wrong, I like Linda Cardellini, but the fact that she's double dipping in the Marvel stuff, like, struck me as interesting, and like, why have her also be Lila? I don't know.
Well, she's a longtime friend of James Gunn's, going back to the Scooby-Doo days. So.
I mean, that's totally fair. But
I mean, it's not. I didn't watch. I mean, I knew it was her, but it's not like I watched this and went like, "Wait a minute,
no,
is that
I didn't think
Otter Clint Barton's wife?"
When I saw her name in the opening credits and I hadn't seen who she was playing in the movie, I was like, "How on earth are they working
Hawkeye's wife into
this film?"
Well, she is Mockingbird, as we know. Although how you get a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent into this period would be pretty interesting. But
yeah, I am really glad they didn't try to like link this up. They could have very easily linked this up with the upcoming film The Marvels, right? Because that's gonna have space stuff in it, and you could have had like Captain Marvel show up at some point for just like a quick cameo, but they didn't, and I appreciate that.
No, I mean, I thought if anything it might be in a post-credit scene, but even those both set up potential other just Guardians related things that might come someday.
Yeah.
No, I loved, and to be fair, she's not the first person to double dip. Of course, Gemma Chan was in both Captain Marvel and the Eternals, and literally her. I mean, that one's not even as disguised; she's just blue in one of them.
Right. Well, and she also has only like 2 lines in Captain Marvel, and isn't really a character.
You know, I haven't heard Gunn talk about if there was any sort of like, I don't know. It seemed like he was just like, this is a friend of mine. She's a great actress. I want her to play this part, and she's great. They're all of them are great. They all do an amazing job. With those characters, you come to love them only so James Gunn can kill them and break your heart.
But the fact that we got a version of the Rocket grew up in a world of animal people like story from the comics is such a like blowing my mind while also twisting the knife in my soul moments of those films.
It's kind of interesting that we are still impressed that they're getting stuff from the comics. Like, at this point, we've seen so much. It's still amazing that they could put anything in there where we're going, I can't believe I'm seeing this.
And again, Guardians started that, right?
Yeah.
Where it's just like, wait, people are actually clicking with the raccoon and the talking tree? I never thought this was... Like, I knew about this because I'm a nerd.
But even still, even we knew about it, but it's not like either one of us would have put Rocket Raccoon high on our favorite characters list.
No, of the people of the Annihilation Saga, I don't even know if he makes the top 10.
No, like, that's the thing where it's like, when they announced Guardians, I'm like, oh yeah, I read that Abnett Lanning run. That was pretty good, but it's not like, I was like, yes, man, it was more like, I should reread that, you know?
I actually enjoyed Ronan the Accuser more as a character during the Annihilation Saga than Rocket Raccoon.
Sure. Did you see the set or the photos they released from the Marvels where the villain in that has the same hammer as Ronan? I'm like, ooh, that's cool.
I have some theories about what's actually happening in the Marvels. I think we're going to deal with some alternate reality bullshit. So I'm excited to get there.
Isn't that kind of what everything is at this point? Aren't we in the multiverse saga or whatever?
Right, exactly. But like, I think there are going to be specific moments that we tack back to, and Ronan the Accuser swapped in some way might be one of them. But we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people in this too. I'm just looking at the cast list where it's like, I love, once again, James Gunn is making movies on such a large scale, but he's still making movies like an indie filmer. He just like Daniela Melchior, who played Ratcatcher 2, is in this movie as the person at the station that Quill kind of hits on and thinks he's really seduced. You know, and it's just stuff like that where you just go,
actually, I thought you were kind of a douche.
I love that, yeah. Or Jennifer Holland, obviously, who's also James Gunn's wife, and Get Off Her Back comics commentators. Also double dipping here is Judy Greer as War Pig.
Yeah, no, that's true. I guess
both Hawkeye's wife and Ant-Man's ex-wife are in this movie as mocap characters.
That's fair. I guess, yeah. Shame on me for not picking up that one.
I actually didn't catch that in the theater. I just see that here on the thing, and I'm like, oh, cool.
Yeah, and of course, D. Bradley Baker making all of the animal sounds.
Yeah, and you've also got Tara Strong being the voice in the mainframe, stuff like that. I mean, there's just lots of and I clocked people where I'm like, oh, I know you. I mean, we talk. Rosenbaum is Martin X. So I mean, yeah, there's lots of people where it's just like, come on, man. But I'm just saying,
this is the part of the show where John and I just scroll through IMDb and look for names.
Well, and of course, and he even snuck the ghost of Rooker in here as Yondu, you know, and Greg Henry comes back at the end as Quill's grandfather, and he's a regular of Gun stuff. I just like, you don't often see, once again, like huge level movies still have that, like, yeah, all my friends are in it.
Yeah.
And I think that says a lot about James Gunn. Number one, that many talented people want to be around him that much.
And that he's collected this stable over the years that have followed him, and like, I mean, Fillion's in all of his movies basically,
yeah. and so is Rooker and Greg Henry, and Greg Henry actually, I think, had a cut scene in 2, because he's not technically in 2. And Lloyd Kaufman, man, Troma movie president Lloyd Kaufman, who gave Gunn his first job, he puts him in every movie. Which I mean, once again, that just speaks to, like, it's just like, I don't forget that I came from absolutely zero budget, quote unquote, trash cinema. That guy's there. That's like Coppola putting Roger Corman in Godfather Part 2. It's just like, no, I owe this guy everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's that sort of like camaraderie and family that comes out in the film, right? Like, you're trying to sell this sense of found family, and you do that by building a found family in real life.
You know, I mean, we we're so used to like press interviews, but when I see the Guardians cast in their interviews, that seems really real in a way that, once again, I don't think other Marvel casts hate each other, but it really does seem like this is a tight-knit group in a way, and all of them going like, yeah, who am I going to be in DC now, James? And by the way, Karen Gillan keeps throwing herself out for Poison Ivy, and I am here for it.
Ooh. Yeah. I mean, obviously the redhead thing like makes that an easy sell, but like,
I'm just saying, like, her physicality, her energy brings some of the kind of spitefulness of Nebula, but add a little bit more of a seductive quality to it. I could totally see her doing that. She'd be great.
Move like John Wayne, talk like what's her name? Sorry.
What?
The note that James Gunn gave her, just
talk like Clint Eastwood and move like Marilyn Monroe.
There we go. Yeah.
And people have been like, is Chris Pratt going to be Booster Gold now? And I'm like, well, he'd be great. I mean, you know, any number of these people. I feel like Pratt is a guy. Actually, we haven't talked about him much because I feel like he's a guy we take for granted, kind of like Downey. We always said this about him as Iron Man, where it's just like, well, he's doing his Chris Pratt thing. You're like, but he's really good at that, and he's very good in this movie. And this movie is so much about the having already established the Rocket and Quill relationship. And you see, this is a guy who, he's so laser focused in this movie. So I will do anything to save my friend. And the whole running bit of my best friend and Drax going second best friend.
I do like how this movie addresses that everyone is aware that Drax is an idiot.
I mean, yeah, but the thing about, like, Drax is an idiot, but he's not useless.
Yeah, exactly.
And him with the kids is just heartwarming.
No, but yeah, getting back to Pratt, it's interesting. I go back and forth on whether or not I think Chris Pratt is what his career is right now is where I want to see him, because he was such the lovable goofus on Parks and Rec, right? And then like after Guardians, he became this leading action star. And I know you love all of that leading action man stuff that he
Live for
does.
it, man. I mean, I can't wait for season 2 of The Terminal List.
Sure. It's just like I said, I go back and forth on whether or not like that vibes with me or not, and I think it's the somewhere in between that I like for him, and that's where Guardians fits squarely.
I mean, it is one of those things where they talked about that they auditioned hundreds of people for Star-Lord, right? Every actor between 25 and 35 auditioned for this role. And the fact that it took forever to finally land on a guy who's like, well, that guy's fat, we can get him in shape, sort of a thing, is like speaks to it. Really kind of only he could play this take on Star-Lord. Like, it almost one of those things where you're going like, wasn't this written for him? And I think it's certainly a thing where it's like script and actor meet and merge into Star-Lord, much in the same way like comic book Tony Stark isn't exactly like Robert Downey Jr., but he became like, it's that thing where I feel like a lot of the best Marvel heroes, whether it be Thor, Captain America, or Iron Man, or Star-Lord, at some point merged with their actor to become this new entity.
Thor is the only one that I can think of off the top of my head that has like been weirdly resistant to that effect. I think Captain America very similarly, though Captain America, I think Chris Evans so perfectly embodied what Captain America is in everyone's heads that he just is the platonic ideal of Captain America.
But Thor, it's interesting. The first 2 Thor movies were kind of met with a not bad, and then the more they started to put Hemsworth in him, though, the more those movies became successful. I definitely think there's a more Hemsworth quality to everything post Ragnarok, right?
Oh, in the movies for certain. I was actually, I guess, thinking about the comic books and how.
Well, I'm not talking about the crossover. I'm just talking about the merging of comic book and actor in the MCU depiction.
Because you even talk about the comics, like comic book Tony Stark and comic book Peter Quill became more like their movie counterparts.
I can't read either of those characters now without hearing the voices of these actors. And same thing with Evans, but as you're saying, it's just Evans became Captain America. And where's that even now not playing the character? He knows, like, everything I say is kind of coming from Captain America. I love that he feels the weight of, I care that I kind of represent Steve Rogers.
Mm-hmm. Even when he's a shitty psychopath with a mustache. In The Gray Man.
But, like, he totally walked away with that movie. And by the way, I watched Ghosted on Apple. Pretty fun. Pretty delightful. Yeah. I mean, it's I'm not going to say it's reinventing the wheel, but it's very charming. And many, many MCU cameos.
Okay. Interesting.
He clearly opened up his phone and goes, who do I know who could be in this?
But yeah, I think Chris Pratt does a great job in this movie. I think he's not necessarily doing any of like the real heavy lifting in this film. I think that's mostly left to like Rocket and the High Evolutionary.
Well, I think it's subtler. I think the bigger moments are that, but I think there's, this movie is so a culmination of his arc too, right? Mm-hmm. That it's sort of like we're seeing. You definitely feel Star-Lord having gone through the other movies, including the Avengers stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And where it lands with Gamora is really interesting because it's not. And let's talk about Gamora, I guess, because where they land Gamora as a character is not. I think a lot of people just expect her to become the Gamora again, and she ends up as this sort of new thing that's a little bit new Gamora, a little bit old Gamora, and is her own thing, which I thought was really interesting.
I really liked that they didn't just have her through some space magic MacGuffin just become old Gamora again. Like, that Gamora is dead. And this movie is about Star-Lord specifically accepting that fact and realizing that just because somebody's walking around with her face does not make her the person that he loved.
But also in the reverse of that, making this new Gamora realize there are things that old Gamora came to learn that are valuable to her that she doesn't need to reject, including her love of the Guardians.
Right.
I mean, the whole, so well done. Talk about just like screenwriting math, the whole running thing of her not understanding Groot until she finally does is a great way to demonstrate that throughout the movie.
That whole runner, and then how it culminates at the very end of the movie when we as the audience understand what Groot is saying, is such an affecting piece of filmmaking that can only be done in the medium of film, I feel like, because it is this acknowledgement of once you get to know and love and understand this character, you will understand what he is saying. And so when the character says, I love you guys, and we as the audience finally understand, that is the film saying, like, you've spent enough time with Groot now that you understand him like all of these people who are his family understand him.
Which is great, because Groot kind of, I'm not going to say he can't have an arc, but Groot is pretty one note purposefully. Groot is Groot. If anything, he is maybe the most well-adjusted of all the Guardians, and he pretty much owns who he is.
Yeah.
There's nothing to overcome.
He is Groot. Tree guy. Don't worry about it.
He is eternal, and he is the heart of the team, though, because he is just so, literally, I love you guys. Like, literally, that is his thing. It's just, his main thing is, you guys are my family. And I'm with you always, right? And so I like that the arc is not about him changing, but us finally just embracing him, right? It's the arc of him across the movies is us just going, we love you too, Groot.
Yeah.
And what a great testament to him. And continued good work from Vin Diesel with that one line in many different ways.
Yeah, I really liked how final form Groot we see at the very end with Rocket's new team is basically the Groot from like the original Abnett and Lanning run, like the big monstrous like crowned Groot.
Yeah, I will say there was a visceral like, oh shit, in the audience when he stood up to his full thing. I also, just being the kind of the things I'm into, him wielding like 8 guns at once just ruled. Just ruled. And I, of course, have already looked. I'm like, you guys are making a figure of that, right? And they are, and I'll pick that up. I need that in my life.
Of course.
Just, I mean, the very John Woo shot of him and Star-Lord both dual-wielding pistols and shooting all the guys is very...
I expected doves to fly across the screen when that happened.
I mean, Gunn is, that's another thing, too, is I feel like... I'm not here just to bash on Whedon, but I think in terms of... And I don't want to say... But, like, guys who are writers first... Gunn is also such a good visual filmmaker. And I think that that's sort of been a criticism of Whedon is that amongst anything, but like in terms of that first Avengers movie is pretty flatly shot. It's not bad, but it's just, Gunn is, like I said, or Kevin Smith even says that about himself. It's like, I shouldn't direct a Marvel movie because I just know how to point a camera at people talking because I'm just here to do my dialogue. And that's true about a lot of people. But I think it's so interesting that Gunn is such a writerly-minded filmmaker, but also, I mean, the one-take sequence when they fight through all of the High Evolutionaries guards is that's one of my favorite Marvel action scenes ever now.
Talk about, like, peak hallway fight, right?
Yeah, man. And getting to do that with all the stuff and the way that they're all using their powers and abilities, each one is so cool.
Gunn has a good aesthetic eye, not for like specific captivating shots, but for composing thematics within a scene, whether that be with color or with songs in mind. And obviously this movie continues the Guardians tradition
talk about the soundtrack.
Of like, soundtrack needle drops being so used in this film.
I think this is my favorite soundtrack, but also it's just my bias because this is probably the closest to the music I listen to, which is like 90 or late 80s, early 90s alt rock.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And when you open the movie with Radiohead and the Flaming Lips, and then that aforementioned fight scene being set to the Beastie Boys, I'm like, these are some of my favorite bands.
I think this
and
movie...
thank you for not using Sabotage, which is the only Beastie Boys song anyone ever uses in movies.
Sure,
so.
Yeah. This movie, over the other 2 Guardians films, though, uses it in a much more diegetic way, which I found very interesting. For those who don't know, the term diegetic means that like the music exists within the scene and the characters are aware of it as well.
We're always loosely meant to think that's the case, right? It's always stated that's the case in other movies, and we see them listening to music, but here we really see them almost queuing up their own music.
And like specifically Rocket singing along with certain songs throughout the movie, and the idea that like he's connecting with those songs on some levels and knows to listen to them and wants to listen to them.
And that's also so much of the passing off of how Star-Lord has affected him, right? And the idea that at the end of the movie, Star-Lord gives him the Zune. And the sort of metaphorical nature of like, you're running the show now. You're the DJ now. You're the captain.
He's
you're the
making
captain
the playlist.
And I thought it was weird when Barkhead Obby from Captain Phillips showed up and said, "You're the captain now." No, you have to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought all that stuff was great. Every song is fantastic. And then I love when you meet the new Guardians team, which I don't know about another Guardians movie, but I wholly expect to see this lineup of Guardians in Kang Dynasty.
Or something, yeah. I want this lineup because I do love the lineup of just all of them. Yeah, and like I said, the nerd in me is like, Faye Lavelle, I know who that is.
Yeah. And that's the same nerd that is writing and directing these movies.
Sure.
But that's the thing. I think that's the other thing too. Is it's not just because people always talk about like we want filmmakers who are knowledgeable or fans of, but it's like James Gunn isn't just. Of course, he knows his comics lore, but it's not enough about that. He loves this stuff. I get the sense he seems to only be making superhero movies, and I don't get the sense that he wants out of that anytime soon. You know, it's just like he is so like this is in his blood, obviously.
Well, because it's the difference between being a fan of this stuff and like knowing the lore backwards and forwards and being motivated to tell stories with these characters, right? And I think there is a fine line, and you can have people who are fans of stuff who try to tell a story with these characters that can fall on their face. And we see that in comic book writing, we see it in movies, we see it all the time. It's the people who genuinely want to have a story to tell with this toy box and know how to play with it in the way that we've talked about in the past just like, we're not trying to break these toys because we know everyone else loves these toys as well.
Yeah.
We're just passionate about telling a story with them.
I think I mentioned this back on one of the other panel ops, and who knows, I as we've talked about after years of doing this, I don't know what I say in real life and what I say on microphone anymore, which luckily hasn't turned into anything awful. Like,
therapy-wise?
Yeah. Well, death, yeah. But I am well medicated, don't worry. There was a while back, there was a quote from Nate Moore, who's one of the main producers at Marvel, and he talked about, he goes, sometimes when people come in to meet with us and they say they're huge fans of the comics, that can be a red flag for us. And I saw everyone, all these comic book nerds on Twitter going like, oh my God, proof they don't want fans making. It's like, no, I get what he's saying. And if you read the full content of the quote, he's like, people who are too slavish to the lore, to the continuity, what we were talking about earlier, I want to adapt this thing because I love it so much and I want to be just like it is on the page. And he goes like, that could stifle the creativity. We are looking to build from this comic book thing, but then make a new movie experience. And I think Gunn is I think he's the best director of superhero films. Like, he is a guy who knows exactly, and other people do it to some extent, but I think even the Russo brothers are fans of comic books but action filmmakers. You know what I mean? Like they are guys who go, I loved reading comics as a kid and I want to make big action movies, so these go hand in hand.
And what the Russo brothers did very well that Gunn is unconstrained by is this idea that the MCU has been going for so long at this point, that it is its own canon at this point. You don't have to be slavish to comic books because there's so much history already built into this series of movies. And so to have it cap off on Infinity War and Endgame, building not on the continuity of the comics these are based on, but just the continuity of the films as they exist, is what the triumph of those two movies is.
Well, and one of the things I heard about, one of the reasons Feige and Raimi got along so well is Raimi's like, it's your lore, guys. You handle that. You tell me what Scarlet Witch stuff needs to be in the script. I'll Raimi it up. Mm-hmm. And I think that movie shows that. That movie is very Raimi, but pushes forward the MCU thing. And he's just like, I don't need to fuck around with that. Like, I don't need to. I'm not here to mess up your thing. I'm here to shepherd it to that and have my fun with it. And I love comic books, but I'm no architect in this thing.
Right. So seeing, to push the conversation a little bit past Guardians 3, seeing a whole film project built by a guy like James Gunn is so interesting because he brings such passion to something that he was just a piece of. To see what he does as the Shepherd, I don't know what that looks like, but I'm really excited to see.
Yeah, because I mean, it does feel like that's the attitude we need more of at DC, which is a company that, like I said, there's been a lot of good stuff, but there certainly has not been is a unity by any stretch. Whether you like those movies or not, that is clearly a company that has been very trepidatious about, do we do this? Do we do that? But I'm sure you, as you have heard as well, apparently The Flash is mind-blowingly good.
We'll see. Yeah, I don't know.
It's very, I mean, it's so interesting. And I mean, everything indicates is at least the thing that's going to try to be the like separate from here on is now a new thing.
It was always going to be back when it was called Flashpoint, right? Like
right.
There was us who have read that comic know like this is a boundary, and from there something different happens.
Right. Yes, exactly. So, well, let's we talk about, we're kind of wrapping up. Let's look a little bit ahead as we always do at the MCU and look at what else is coming. Once again, some of this stuff is going to be delayed, unfortunately.
Although we haven't talked about it much, but yeah, the writer strike is ongoing, and like the two of us maybe aren't qualified to talk a lot about it. Like, we know enough about how the WGA works that like we could probably explain in some detail. But if you want a full explanation of like everything that's going on with what this quote unquote writer strike is,
the Writers Guild has I recommend Billy Ray, who's a screenwriter, is doing a podcast for the WGA right now that is just strike updates. With other writers and stuff like that, so I recommend listening to that. And
going over to Adam Conover is one of the board members. I think he is doing an amazing job on Twitter of explaining everything that's happening with the strike.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's stupid. I'll just say, my only statement is it's stupid it ever got to a strike. It shouldn't be here, but here we are.
Yeah, no, and everyone's online is joking in one fashion or another about just like, oh, we all remember what the last strike killed, and pointing at like Hero Season 2 and like
yeah. So I mean, we do know the Marvels is finished and that comes out in November. Captain America New World Order is actively filming, so that's coming. I think Thunderbolts, I don't know if they're in a place where they were about to start filming, so that may still go forward. But Blade is the big one that's been delayed because
that was already delayed due to some writing issues that were happening there.
Yeah, they literally like a week before the strike brought in a new writer on it, Nick Pizzolatto, who is the showrunner of True Detective, which I have to imagine was a Mahershala Ali call since he was the star of season 3 of True Detective.
Sure. So yeah, that's probably, I mean, some of the effects of the writer strike aren't going to be felt for a couple of years.
Because a lot of stuff is in the can, right? Or right. Is at least underway filming and is basically ready to go. So it won't affect anything this year and probably not even a lot of next year's movies. Right. It will be end of next year into the other, depending on, I mean, who knows how long the strike will last, the other thing, too. If this thing wraps up next week, we probably won't feel any effect. But the other thing is just fucking end the strike already, because producers, you're gonna cave. You're gonna cave. I'm sorry. This is my thing. It's like, there's just, they have the upper hand.
Maybe. And I just remember how the last strike ended with kind of a whimper rather than a bang. Like, there was a negotiation that happened, and eventually, like, neither side was happy, and maybe that's the nature of negotiation.
Well, and actually, a lot of people brought up the reason this strike is happening is because a lot of stuff actually wasn't decided on the last strike. Yeah. So it kind of rolls into the other one. There was a lot of short-sighted solution there that now has reared its ugly head once more. So
right, and obviously, like, streaming has changed a lot of every.
And it was that's sort of the thing, is like people are talking about that was just in its infancy, so nobody really thought to hash that out then, and we could have avoided this if they. But of course, no one had the foresight. But like that maybe should have been anyway. Marvels looks fantastic. That trailer is so much fun. It just fills me with joy.
Seeing it in a theater for the first time, the trailer made me incredibly happy.
Yeah, it looks like a blast, and Aman Vellani is just a ray of sunshine, and I'm so excited to see. And I love the dynamic, clearly, of her with a little bit more serious Carol Danvers and then Monica Rambeau sort of being the caught between those two polar opposites of vibes. That's going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, I'm a Captain America guy above most other stuff, so New World Order is very high on my list of expectations.
I was reading some rumors that they might change the title of that film before release. I don't know how much
could be.
Validity there is to that.
That could be.
Though I am super excited for that movie because it also kind of looks like a soft Hulk sequel, which I'm very excited about.
I'm curious about that because it does have both Tim Blake Nelson and Liv Tyler coming back from Incredible Hulk, which is really interesting. I mean, obviously we knew Harrison Ford is playing Thunderbolt Ross, but Thunderbolt Ross has been in tons of other Avengers and spy-related stuff that has nothing to do with the Hulk. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm just excited because, like, when he first came back, everyone was just like, "Oh, so that movie does count? Cool." But now they're kind of leaning into it, which I find interesting, and I'm enjoying to see what they do.
Yeah, I think that movie has its flaws, but is generally pretty good, and certainly doesn't need to be written off. And I liked all that casting. I mean, I was always bummed we didn't get to see Tim Blake Nelson as the leader. So I
was always bummed we never got to see more Ed Norton. Don't get me wrong, I like Ruffalo, but like I think he was a very interesting Bruce Banner / Hulk.
I think he was. I mean, I think it's one of those things where I think we would have had a great time if he had continued being our Banner. But I also love Mark Ruffalo, so
yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like I certainly was bummed at the time. I'm also excited because that movie is written by Malcolm Spellman, who was the showrunner of Falcon and Winter Soldier. So he's just going to roll right into what he started in that show.
I just rewatched Falcon and Winter Soldier. That show is like, it's quietly maybe the best written of the Marvel shows.
It might be my favorite, but also once again, when you talk about
extremely
personal,
biased,
like that's my section of the MCU. I like them. That's why I can't wait for Secret Invasion as well, because I'm like, ooh, alien invasion espionage drama. That couldn't be more my thing.
Secret Invasion is next month, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, that's right. I almost went, no, it's June, but then I'm like, right, it's May, because that's why we're starting this new YouTube series now, because it's going to run through the summer at the very least. In fact, I think that the next one of these, I no promises, and we don't know when these are going up once again, but I believe the next one of these will be Fast X, which will have Brendan Jones and Michael Listman of Last to Be Curious, because they've been brushing up on their...
I am so curious to read the defeated looks on their faces as you have forced them to watch the rest of this franchise in such short order to catch up with Fast X.
They have been shotgunning it. I will say, and I'll let you guess which, one of them has enjoyed it much more than the other one.
I'm not going to make that call. I'm going to save that for content.
I'm not telling you to make that call on here, but I'm saying yes, because we have finished recording those, so those are coming out over on, and a good way to plug our patron content. If you go to patron.podbean.com/punchup, which you can go ahead and click the thing right. I think it's here. It's in there. You can head over there, and that's coming out weekly over there. I think we're as of the release of this, we're just putting out Furious 7. So, and we did do Hobbs and Shaw.
I will say, like 6 and 7 is when it firmly becomes G.I. Joe.
Yeah. Yes. I think having rewatched them again this time, I think currently my favorite is 8, The Fate of the Furious. That does have a submarine chase in it. So,
yeah.
And zombie cars, which just rules. So, yeah.
Yep.
But we'll definitely be talking about The Flash on here. When it comes, I think Indiana Jones is going to be an actual panel episode, so that will be coming. But yeah, we'll check in. Like I said, this is a show that we're gonna come back to. There's not going to be any kind of regular schedule. It's going to be a per movie basis if we feel there's stuff to talk about and we have people who want to talk about. And it won't always just be Gergoni and I. Sometimes we'll bring in other people. Like I said, we're going to have Listman and Brendan on for Fast X.
Sure, and I'm sure we'll get other guests in as well. John, can I twist your arm to do an episode on The Little Mermaid?
Oh, yeah. You don't have to twist my arm.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I don't know.
I'm a Little Mermaid fan. I'm here for it, man.
Now, can I twist your arm to do an episode on the new Kamen Rider?
Oh no, yeah, no. I mean, you don't have to twist my. You can do an episode. I just don't have to be there
Okay.
for it.
Oh, I see. So, okay, we watch a a remake of a classic '90s Disney movie. You're on board, but suddenly we watch the remake of a storied Japanese action franchise, and you're out the window.
Well, I mean, if we want to talk about Kurosawa movies or something, I mean, but that's not really my jam. But like I said, I mean, that's kind of part of why this is not said. Is let me say there should be other people who would be more inclined to talk about that.
That's fair. Okay.
Yeah. So those are all potential episodes coming up. That's why you got to make sure you like and subscribe, ring that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our reviews or any of our other great content here on the Punch Up Entertainment channel.
It's true. Toggle that dongle and let us know in the comments below if there's any stuff, particularly this summer, but even into the future, that you want us to cover on this semi-ongoing series.
Because you can't twist my arm to do Kamen Rider. I'm not going to twist your arm to do the new Exorcist movie when it comes out in October.
That's totally fair. I appreciate your understanding about.
But
my
I have a feeling.
Nature.
I have a feeling that one of your panelists from Matcom will happily join me for that episode. So.
And Elliot can do what they please.
All right, so that'll wrap up. Thank you for watching this first episode, which is they won't always necessarily be this long. With this movie is a long movie, we had a lot to talk about. So
it's true indeed.
Join us next time. But that's gonna wrap. I don't have an ending for this, so
that's gonna end Panel Up at the Movies. As always, he's been John Campbell,
and he's been Mike Gergoni.
Have a good one, everybody.